The lecture hall was massive, built to hold students of all shapes and sizes. Hyun sat in the middle row, his notebook open on the desk in front of him. Around him, students from dozens of different worlds whispered to each other. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few looked like they were made of living crystal. The Valorum Intergalactic Academy was home to all of them. Hyun was human, one of only 3 in the entire school. His people were new to the galaxy, barely 50 years since first contact. Most species here came from civilizations thousands of years old. Sometimes that made him feel small. Other times it just made him curious. Professor Velthar entered the room, his 4 arms carrying data tablets and specimen containers. He was Crinion, an insect-like species with compound eyes that could see in multiple directions at once. His mandibles clicked as he spoke, and the universal translator in Hyun's ear turned it into words he could understand. "Today we begin a special unit," the professor announced. "Apex Predator Psychology Across Worlds." The room went quiet. Hyun noticed how several students shifted in their seats. The Quillen students, who looked like tall rabbits with soft gray fur, moved closer together. Even the Dravek in the front row, a warrior species with 4 muscular arms and tough orange skin, seemed uncomfortable. "To understand predators," Professor Velthar continued, "we must face our fears directly. Knowledge without experience is incomplete. Therefore, I have arranged for a live specimen to join us." A friendly student, small and bird-like with nervous movements, raised one wing arm. "What kind of specimen, Professor?" "A Varathian ripclaw cub," the room erupted. Students stood up, talking over each other. Some voices were angry, others terrified. Hyun stayed seated, watching the chaos with interest. "That's too dangerous," shouted a Quillen student named Vinla. Her long ears were flat against her head, a sign of extreme fear. "Ripclaws kill adults of most species, even as cubs. My family would remove me from this academy," added another student. Professor Velthar raised all 4 arms, calling for silence. "The creature will be contained. Safety protocols are in place. The dean has approved this lesson. However, any student who wishes to leave may do so without penalty." Several students immediately stood and left. Others remained but moved to seats farther from the front. Hyun stayed where he was. His roommate Taeyang, sitting beside him, leaned over. "You're not scared?" Taeyang asked. He was human too, though taller than Hyun and more outgoing. His eyes were wide with excitement rather than fear. "Should I be?" Hyun replied quietly. "Dude, ripclaws are legendary. They're from a nightmare world. I read that they can smell fear from a kilometer away and their claws can cut through steel." Hyun nodded slowly. "I grew up on a farm. We had animals. Some were dangerous, but fear and respect are different things." Taeyang stared at him. "I'll never understand how you stay so calm." Across the room, a female human student named Hana caught Hyun's eye. She was studying xenophysiology and medicine, and she looked more curious than frightened. She gave him a small nod. At least some humans weren't panicking. A reptilian student named Nixva, whose people came from a hot desert world, spoke up. "Professor, why a ripclaw specifically? There are many predator species that are less lethal." "Because the Varathian ripclaw represents one of the apex predators in known space," Professor Velthar explained. "They are solitary hunters, highly intelligent, and have never been domesticated or tamed by any species. If we can understand them, we can understand the psychology of predation itself." Hyun raised his hand. "Professor, you said they're intelligent. What's their social structure?" "Solitary, as I mentioned. They don't form packs or family groups beyond the mother raising cubs until they can hunt alone. They're territorial and aggressive toward other ripclaws outside of mating season." "But the mothers raise the cubs?" Hyun pressed. "So they're capable of bonding?" Professor Velthar's compound eyes focused on Hyun. "Temporarily, yes. But this is instinct, not emotion, as you might understand it. Don't romanticize them, young human. They are predators in the purest sense." Something about that statement felt wrong to Hyun, but he didn't argue. He'd learned that in this academy, humans were often dismissed. Their homeworld, Earth, was classified as a death world by galactic standards, full of dangerous predators and harsh environments. But because humans seemed so adaptable and friendly, most species thought they must have been prey that got lucky with intelligence. Hyun knew better. So did every human who'd studied their own history, but explaining it never seemed to help. The doors at the front of the lecture hall opened with a loud hiss. 2 security officers, both wearing heavy armor, wheeled in a large container on a floating platform. The container was made of reinforced metal with glowing energy barriers visible through observation windows. Inside, something moved. The lights in the lecture hall dimmed automatically, and screens around the room lit up with information about Vorathian ripclaws. Hyun read quickly. Native to Vorathis Prime, a planet with gravity 1.4 times Earth standard. Carnivorous, apex predator with no natural enemies, 6 legs, armored scales, multiple eyes for enhanced depth perception, bite force capable of crushing bone and metal. A sound came from the container. It was deep, rumbling, and made several students flinch. The security officers locked the container's platform into place at the front of the room and quickly retreated to the sides. The specimen is a juvenile, Professor Velthar said, his voice now quieter. Approximately 6 months old. Still dependent on its mother in the wild. However, at this age, it's already capable of killing most species represented in this room. Then why bring it here? Demanded the Dravek warrior student whose bravado seemed to have faded. Because understanding requires proximity. You cannot know a predator by reading about it. You must see it, hear it, smell it. You must feel what prey feels. The professor moved to a control panel. I will now deactivate the containment field in stages. The creature will remain in the designated area, separated from us by an energy barrier. Observe its movements, its behavior. Note how your body reacts. This is the ancient dance between predator and prey. Hyun watched as the first layer of containment dissolved. Through the observation window, he could now see the creature more clearly. It was big, much bigger than he'd expected for a cub. Dark scales covered its body, and its 6 eyes glowed with a reddish light. The Ripclaw cub moved to the edge of its container, and those eyes swept across the room. Students went silent. It was looking at them, studying them. When Professor Velthar opened the final containment layer, releasing the cub into the secured area behind the energy barrier, the creature's muscles tensed. It opened its mouth, revealing rows of serrated teeth, and released a sound that shook the air itself. It was a roar that triggered something primal in every being in that room. A sound that said, "Predator, danger, run." Everyone reacted. Everyone except Hyun, who leaned forward in his seat, his eyes narrowing not with fear but with concern. The Ripclaw cub was terrifying to look at. Its scales were black like polished stone, catching the light in strange ways. 6 legs ended in claws that looked sharp enough to tear through anything. The creature's body was built for killing, every muscle visible beneath the armored skin. When it moved with a grace that promised deadly speed. The students couldn't look away, even though many of them wanted to. The Quillen students had huddled together in the back corner, their prey instincts overwhelming every rational thought. A few were openly crying. The Frenthi student had activated a personal shield, a shimmering bubble of energy that surrounded her seat. Even the Dravek warrior, who had boasted before class about his combat training, had gone pale. His forearms trembled slightly. Professor Velthar tried to continue his lecture, his voice steady despite the tension. Notice the muscle structure. See how the rear legs are more powerful, designed for the killing lunge. The front 4 legs provide balance and can also be used to grip prey. But nobody was taking notes. They were all staring at the creature behind the barrier, watching every movement, ready to run if that barrier failed. The Ripclaw cub paced along the edge of the energy field. Its 6 eyes swept across the room again and again. It opened its mouth and roared once more. The sound was worse the second time because now they knew what was coming. It was a sound designed by evolution to freeze prey in place, to stop them from running so the predator could strike. Several more students activated shields. Others pulled up emergency evacuation routes on their tablets. The fear in the room was thick enough to taste, but Hyun wasn't looking at the creature the way everyone else was. While they saw a monster, he saw something different. His eyes tracked the Ripclaw's movements carefully. He watched how it moved, where it looked, what it did with its body. The creature wasn't pacing like a predator about to attack. It was pacing like something trapped. Its ears, small and close to its head, were pinned flat back. Its tail, thick and powerful, was tucked slightly. When it roared, it didn't move forward. It moved back toward the corner of its enclosed area. "It's scared," Hyun said quietly. Taeyang looked at him like he'd gone crazy. "What, the cub? It's frightened. That thing could kill everyone in this room and you think it's scared?" Hyun nodded slowly. "Look at its body language. The ears back, the defensive posture. It's not hunting. It's cornered. Professor Velthar had heard him, his compound eyes focused on Hyun. Young human, I appreciate your attempt to contribute, but I have studied Varathian ripclaws for 20 cycles. That creature is displaying typical predatory behavior. With respect, Professor, Hyun said, standing up slowly. I don't think it is. The room went even quieter. Students stared at Hyun like he'd volunteered to be eaten. Explain, the professor said, his tone making it clear he expected to correct a foolish student. Hyun pointed at the cub. Look at its tail position. In most predator species, an aggressive tail is raised or straight. That tail is tucked, and its ears are pinned back, which usually signals fear or submission, not aggression. The roaring isn't a hunting call. It's a distress call. Nixva, the reptilian student, suddenly sat up straighter. Her people had an ancient relationship with predators on their world, considering them sacred. She started looking at the ripclaw differently, her head tilting as she observed. The human may be correct, she said slowly. Those movements, they're defensive. Professor Velthar's mandibles clicked in what might have been irritation or thought. Even if that were true, approaching a frightened predator is more dangerous than approaching a hunting one. Maybe, Hyun admitted. But we're not helping it by keeping it scared. We brought it here. It's just a juvenile away from its mother, surrounded by creatures it doesn't know, in a place that smells wrong and sounds wrong. Of course it's terrified. Hana, the other human student, stood up from her seat. He's right, Professor. I've been reading the physiological data from the sensors in the containment area. The cub's stress hormones are extremely elevated. Heart rate is high. These aren't the readings of a predator about to strike. They're the readings of a panicked juvenile. Professor Velthar was silent for a long moment. The ripclaw cub roared again, and this time Hyun heard it differently. It wasn't a roar of aggression. It was a cry for help, for its mother, for safety. What do you suggest? The professor finally asked. Hyun took a breath. What he was about to suggest was dangerous, possibly stupid. But something in him, something that remembered growing up around animals on the farm, told him it was right. Let me approach the barrier. Let me try to calm it down. The room exploded with protests. Students shouted that it was suicide. The Dravik warrior said humans must be insane. Even Taeyang grabbed Hyun's arm, trying to pull him back to his seat. Hyun, this isn't some farm animal. This is an alien predator from a death world. Earth is a death world too, Hyun said quietly. Remember? That made Taeyang pause. It was true. By galactic standards, Earth was classified as extremely dangerous. Heavy gravity, violent weather, tectonic instability, and filled with predators. Humans had survived it all. Professor Velthar raised his arms for silence. This is highly irregular. The liability alone. A voice came through the room's communication system. It was Dean Shalvex, who had been monitoring the class remotely. Let the human try. I'm curious to see if their reputation is warranted. All other students moved to the observation room now. There was no arguing with the dean. Students filed out quickly, some looking relieved to leave, others reluctant to miss what might happen. Taeyang squeezed Hyun's shoulder before leaving. Don't die, okay? I'll try not to. Soon, only Hyun, Professor Velthar, and the two security officers remained in the main lecture hall. Hana had refused to leave, claiming that as a medical student she should be present in case of injury. Nixva had also stayed, saying her people's traditions required her to witness this. Hyun walked slowly toward the energy barrier. Each step felt heavy. His heart was beating fast, but his mind was calm. He'd been around dangerous animals before. A bull that could gore him, horses that could crush him with a kick, even wild dogs that wandered onto the farm. The key was never to show fear, never to be aggressive, always to be calm. The ripclaw cub tracked his movement. All 6 eyes locked onto him. The creature went very still, its body tense. It could attack. The barrier might hold or it might not. Nobody was completely sure. Hyun stopped a meter from the barrier. He was close enough to see every detail of the creature now. The individual scales, each one like black glass. The eyes, which weren't just red but had depth to them. Intelligence. The claws, which could definitely tear through steel. Hey there, Hyun said softly, though he knew the creature couldn't understand his words. But tone mattered. Tone was universal. You're okay. Nobody's going to hurt you. He raised his hand slowly and placed it against the energy barrier. The field hummed against his palm, warm and tingling. The ripclaw's eyes fixed on his hand. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the cub did something nobody expected. It whimpered. The sound was small, almost pathetic coming from such a dangerous creature, but it was unmistakable. A sound of distress, of loneliness, of fear. The same sound scared animals made across countless worlds. Professor Velthar's mandibles hung open in shock. Hannah gasped. Even the security officers looked at each other in confusion. "That's impossible," the professor whispered. "Vorathian ripclaws don't vocalize like that. They're solitary predators. They don't make distress calls." But they were hearing it, and Hyun understood that in this moment, all the research, all the centuries of observation had missed something fundamental. They'd been watching these creatures through the lens of fear, not understanding. The ripclaw cub took a hesitant step toward the barrier, toward Hyun's hand. Its ears came up slightly, no longer pinned flat. The defensive posture eased just a fraction. "That's it," Hyun said softly. "It's okay. You're safe." The cub took another step, then another. It was approaching him. This small, soft creature that showed no fear. The creature that spoke in calm tones and didn't smell like prey. The whimper changed everything. It was a sound that shouldn't exist in the galactic records. Vorathian ripclaws were supposed to be perfect killing machines. Creatures of pure instinct and aggression. They hunted alone, lived alone, died alone. They didn't make sounds of distress. They didn't bond. They didn't need comfort. Yet here was one, making exactly that sound. Hyun kept his hand against the barrier, his voice steady and gentle. "It's all right. I know you're scared. This place is strange, isn't it? All these smells, these lights, these sounds. You want your mother?" The cub couldn't understand the words, but it understood something. The tone, maybe. Or the body language. Hyun kept himself relaxed, non-threatening. His posture slightly lowered to appear less imposing. These were signals that worked on Earth's predators. Somehow they seemed to work here too. The ripclaw cub slowly, carefully approached the barrier where Hyun stood. Its 6 legs moved with less tension now. The creature's head lowered slightly, not in aggression but in something that looked almost like curiosity. Professor Velthar stood frozen, watching. His forearms hung at his sides, his usual confident posture gone. His compound eyes tracked every movement. "This shouldn't be possible," he muttered. "They're solitary. They don't respond to social cues from other species. They can't be calmed." Hannah had pulled out her medical scanner, reading the data streaming from the sensors monitoring the ripclaw. "Professor, look at these readings. The cub's stress hormones are dropping. Heart rate is decreasing. It's actually calming down." From the observation room where the other students watched through protective glass, Hyun could hear voices. They sounded confused, frightened, amazed. Taeyang's voice came through the communication system. "What's he doing? How is he doing this?" Hannah looked up from her scanner, and suddenly something clicked in her mind. She turned to face the observation window, addressing the students watching. "I think I understand. On Earth, humans lived alongside predators for millions of years. Not just lived alongside them. They befriended them." She pulled up a holographic display, her hands moving quickly across the controls. Images appeared in the air. A dog sitting next to a human child. A cat curled in someone's lap. A horse being ridden across fields. Then more images. Wolves, the ancestors of dogs. Big cats that humans had learned to work with. Even bears in some cultures. These creatures could kill humans easily, Hannah continued. The dog's ancestors were pack hunters that could tear prey apart. Cats are perfect ambush predators. Horses can crush a human with a single kick. But humans formed bonds with them. They learned to speak their language. Nixiva, still in the main lecture hall, spoke up. Her reptilian features showed what might have been understanding. "On my world, we have ancient texts about the old speakers, those who could communicate with the great predators. We thought they were myths, stories from before written history. Maybe they weren't myths," Hannah said. "Maybe some species just understood something others didn't." Hyun, still at the barrier, heard all of this but didn't turn around. His focus remained on the ripclaw cub, which had now pressed its snout against the energy field, sniffing toward his hand. The barrier prevented actual contact, but the intention was clear. The cub wanted to get closer to him. "Professor," Hyun said calmly, "I need you to lower the barrier. Just a small section at floor level." The lecture hall went dead silent. Even through the communication system, Hyun could hear the shocked gasps from the observation room. "Absolutely not," Professor Velthar said immediately. The liability, the danger, the protocols. The cub won't attack. Hyun interrupted, his voice still calm. Look at it. Really look at it. Does that look like a creature about to strike? The Ripclaw cub had sat down, a position that made it look almost like the dogs from Hana's holographic display. Its tail was no longer tucked. Its ears were forward, alert but not afraid. It made another sound, not a roar or a whimper, but something in between. A questioning sound. Dean Shalvix's voice came through the communication system again. Lower the barrier, Professor. Small section. Floor level. If the human is wrong, the security officers can respond in time. Professor Velthar's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme stress in his species. But he moved to the controls. This goes against every safety protocol. If you're wrong, young human, I'm not wrong, Hyun said simply. The energy barrier flickered. A small section near the floor, barely half a meter wide, disappeared. There was now a gap between Hyun and the Ripclaw cub. Nothing but air separated them. The security officers tensed, their weapons ready but not raised. Hana held her breath. Nixiva whispered what might have been a prayer in her native language. The Ripclaw cub stared at the opening. It could lunge through. It could attack. Its claws could reach Hyun in less than a second. Every instinct, millions of years of evolution, should have driven it to strike at this vulnerable prey. Instead, the cub slowly extended its head through the gap. Its snout, covered in those hard black scales, pushed through the opening. It sniffed at Hyun's hand, which still hung in the air, steady and calm. Hyun didn't pull back. He didn't flinch. He let the creature catch his scent, learned that he wasn't food, wasn't a threat, just another being, different but not dangerous. Then, Hyun did something that made everyone in the academy hold their breath. He reached through the gap and gently touched the Ripclaw cub's head. His hand found a spot just behind what might be called the creature's ear, a ridge of scales that felt warm beneath his fingers. He scratched gently the way he might pet a nervous dog, the Ripclaw cub's 6 eyes half closed. Its body, which had been tense despite the calm, relaxed completely. And then a sound emerged from deep in its chest. Not a growl, not a roar, something else entirely. A purr. It was deeper than a cat's purr, more like a rumbling vibration that Hyun could feel through his hand. But it was unmistakably a purr, a sound of contentment, of pleasure, of trust. Professor Velthar made a sound that the translator couldn't quite capture. Shock maybe, or wonder. In 20 cycles of study, he said softly, I have never seen this, never even heard of this. Varathian Ripclaws are not social. They don't bond. They don't purr? Maybe they do, Hyun said, still scratching behind the cub's ear ridge. When someone finally speaks their language. Taeyang's voice came through the communication system, full of amazement. Guys, do you realize what this means? Humans aren't just from a death world. They're predators who learn to talk to other predators. We're the galaxy's animal whisperers. Hana was frantically recording data, her scanner working overtime. This is going to rewrite xenobiology textbooks. The bonding capability, the social signals, the communication across species barriers. This is revolutionary. Nixva moved closer, her movements slow and careful. She wanted to see this up close, this moment that confirmed her species' ancient stories. The old speakers, she said quietly. They were real. And humans are them. The Ripclaw cub pushed more of its head through the gap, clearly wanting more attention. Its purring grew louder. Hyun used his other hand now, scratching different spots, finding the places that made the creature's eyes close in bliss. From the observation room, students who had been terrified minutes ago now pressed against the glass, watching in wonder. This was impossible by everything they'd been taught. Predators and prey couldn't coexist like this. Fear was the only natural response to creatures like the Ripclaw. Yet here was a human, barely into his adult years by his species' standards, petting a nightmare creature like it was a beloved pet. Then the alarm started blaring. Red lights flashed throughout the lecture hall. The security officers grabbed their weapons. Professor Velthar's compound eyes went wide with what could only be terror. The adult Varathian Ripclaw, the cub's mother, had broken free from the holding area. She was loose in the station, and according to the tracker, she was heading directly toward the lecture hall, toward her cub. And Hyun was still standing at the barrier, hand extended to the cub, exactly where the mother would arrive in less than a minute. Everyone out, Professor Velthar shouted. Emergency protocols. No, Hyun said firmly. He didn't move from his position. The cub, sensing the tension, made that whimpering sound again, but it didn't pull away from Hyun's touch. Are you insane? The professor shouted. An adult Ripclaw will tear through this room like paper. It's coming for its offspring, and you're the closest thing to a threat. Hyun looked at the cub, still purring under his hand, still trusting him. Then he looked at Professor Velthar, and his expression was completely calm. If we run, we're prey. If we stay calm, we're not a threat. The mother is coming because her cub was in distress, but the cub isn't distressed anymore. The pounding footsteps of something massive echoed through the corridors outside, getting closer, getting louder. Hyun took a deep breath and sat down on the floor, making himself smaller, less threatening. He kept one hand on the cub. Trust me, he said to the room, or leave. But I'm staying right here. The sound of the approaching Ripclaw grew louder with each second. It wasn't just footsteps. It was the thunder of a massive predator in motion, claws scraping against metal floors, the deep rumble of breathing that vibrated through the walls. Through the communication system, Hyun could hear security teams shouting, falling back, unable to stop the creature without using lethal force. And lethal force would start a war. The Varathian sovereignty didn't take kindly to their people being killed, even on accident. Professor Velthar was at the controls trying to bring up emergency barriers, calling for backup, his forearms moving frantically. The security officers had their weapons raised now, aimed at the main entrance. Sweat dripped from their faces. They knew those weapons probably wouldn't stop an adult Ripclaw, but they had to try. Last chance to evacuate, one of the officers said, his voice tight with fear. Hyun stayed seated on the floor, his hand still gently touching the cub. The young Ripclaw had stopped purring but hadn't pulled away. It was looking toward the door now, ears perked up, body tense but not frightened. It recognized what was coming, its mother. Taeyang's voice crackled through the communication system from the observation room. Hyun, get out of there! This is crazy, even for you. But Hana's voice came next, quieter but firm. Wait, everyone wait. Look at what he's doing. Hyun had closed his eyes for a moment, taking slow breaths. When he opened them again, his whole body was relaxed. Not the frozen stillness of fear, but the genuine calm of someone at peace with their decision. He positioned himself beside the barrier gap, not blocking it but close to it. Close to the cub. If I run now, Hyun said quietly, the mother will see prey running. Her instincts will take over. But if I stay calm, if I show no fear, no aggression, maybe she'll see something else. Like what? Professor Velthar demanded, his voice high with stress. A threat to her cub? That's worse. Like someone who helped her cub, Hyun replied. Animals aren't mindless. They remember kindness. They recognize when someone means no harm. Nixva, who had moved to a safer position but hadn't left the room entirely, spoke up. The old texts say that predators respect courage and calm. They say that those who face the great hunters without fear or violence are seen as equals, not prey. Those are myths, Professor Velthar shouted. Maybe, Nixva said, or maybe they're memories of truth. The doors to the lecture hall exploded inward. Metal shrieked and tore. The emergency barriers flickered and failed. And through the smoke and debris, the mother Ripclaw entered. She was enormous, 3 times the size of her cub, maybe more. Her scales were darker, scarred from countless hunts, each mark a story of survival and victory. Her 6 legs were thick with muscle that rippled beneath armored skin. Her claws weren't just sharp. They looked like they could tear through starship hulls. And her eyes, those 6 glowing red eyes, held an intelligence that was terrifying to behold. This was an apex predator in her prime. A creature that had never known defeat. A mother whose child had been taken, she roared. The sound was beyond description. It wasn't just loud. It reached into the primitive parts of the brain, the parts that remembered when humanity's ancestors were prey, when things with teeth and claws hunted in the darkness. Several people in the observation room screamed. One of the security officers dropped his weapon, his hands shaking too badly to hold it. Professor Velthar stumbled backward, all 4 arms raised in a futile defensive gesture. The mother Ripclaw's eyes swept the room, searching. They found her cub immediately. The young one chirped, a sound of recognition and relief. But the mother's eyes didn't soften. They locked onto Hyun, the creature closest to her offspring. The potential threat. She began to move forward, her gait purposeful and deadly. Every instinct she had was screaming at her to eliminate the danger to her cub. Her claws extended, scraping the floor. Her mouth opened, revealing teeth that could crush bone like paper. Hyun did not run, did not reach for a weapon, did not show fear. He slowly, deliberately sat down cross-legged on the floor. He made himself smaller, less imposing. He turned his head slightly to the side, not looking directly at the mother. Direct eye contact could be seen as a challenge. His hands rested on his knees, open and empty, showing he held no weapons. Every human instinct screamed at him to run. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. His muscles wanted to move, to flee, to survive. But he held himself still. "It's okay," he said softly, though his voice trembled slightly. "I'm not a threat. Your cub is safe." "I helped your cub." The mother Ripclaw paused. She was only a few meters away now, close enough that Hyun could smell her. A scent of musk and earth and something sharp like ozone. She tilted her head, studying the small, soft creature that refused to run. The cub chirped again, louder this time. It pushed more of its body through the barrier gap, trying to reach toward both Hyun and its mother. The young Ripclaw was making sounds now, vocalizations that the translator couldn't interpret but that clearly carried meaning. It was communicating with its mother. The mother's eyes moved between Hyun and her cub. She took another step forward. The security officers tightened their grips on their weapons, but they didn't fire. They couldn't fire. Not with Hyun right there. Hana's voice, barely a whisper through the communication system. The cub is telling her. Look at the body language. The cub is telling its mother that Hyun is safe. The mother Ripclaw lowered her massive head, bringing it close to Hyun. She sniffed, her breath hot and carrying that same sharp scent. She was reading him, learning everything she could from his scent. Fear, yes, she could smell that, no doubt, but also something else. No aggression, no hostility, no intent to harm. Hyun kept his breathing steady. "I know you were scared. Your baby was taken and you didn't know where. You were protecting your family. That's good. That's what mothers do. Mine would have done the same." His voice was calm, soothing. The mother couldn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. This was how you spoke to frightened animals, how you spoke to creatures in pain. Gentle, calm, non-threatening. The cub wriggled through the barrier gap completely now, its smaller size allowing it to fit. It immediately went to its mother, rubbing against her front legs, making happy sounds. The mother nuzzled her cub, checking it for injuries, her maternal instincts taking over for a moment, but her eyes never left Hyun. The cub turned back toward Hyun, taking a few steps in his direction. It clearly wanted to return to the human who had scratched its ears and made it feel safe. The mother tensed, a low growl building in her throat. This was the moment. The test. Hyun reached into his pack slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. Several people gasped, thinking he was reaching for a weapon. But what he pulled out was simple. His lunch. A nutrition bar sealed in plastic. He unwrapped it carefully, the sound loud in the tense silence. He broke off a piece and held it out toward the cub, placing it on the floor between them. The cub approached immediately, sniffed the offering, then picked it up gently with its teeth. It wasn't food the cub needed or even particularly wanted. Varathian Ripclaws were carnivores, and this was plant-based protein. But it was a gift, a gesture. The mother watched this carefully. On her world, on Varathis Prime, sharing prey was sacred. It was what packmates did, what mates did, what family did. This small creature was offering food to her offspring. Hyun took a breath, knowing this was insane, knowing he might die in the next few seconds. He broke off another piece of the nutrition bar and held it out. Not to the cub this time, but to the mother. To offer food to an apex predator. To extend his hand toward those jaws that could bite it off in an instant. Every fiber of his being screamed that this was wrong, but he did it anyway. The mother Ripclaw stared at the offered food. At the small, fragile hand extending it. At this creature that should be running, should be cowering, should be prey, but wasn't acting like prey at all. She lowered her head slowly. Her mouth opened. Those terrible teeth, each one capable of tearing through flesh and bone, moved closer to Hyun's hand. Closer, closer. And then, gently, carefully, she took the offered food. She ate it. It probably tasted strange to her, wrong for her diet, but she ate it anyway. Because she understood what it meant. Not food but peace, not prey but offering, not threat but respect. The mother Ripclaw made a sound then, deep and rumbling. The cub responded immediately, relaxing completely. And then the mother did something that nobody watching could quite believe. She sat down. Right there, a few meters from Hyun, she sat down. It was a gesture of ultimate trust. Predators didn't sit in the presence of threats. They stayed ready to fight or flee. But sitting meant you are safe, I am safe. We are safe. Hyun let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. His hand was shaking now, the adrenaline catching up with him. But he smiled, a small, genuine smile. Thank you, he said quietly. The cub, seeing both its mother and Hyun calm, did what young creatures everywhere do when they feel safe. It walked over to Hyun, climbed into his lap with its 6 legs scrambling for purchase, turned around 3 times like a dog finding the perfect spot, and settled down. Within moments, the deadly predator cub was asleep in the human's arms, purring softly. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The lecture hall was frozen in a scene that shouldn't exist. A massive Varathian ripclaw mother sitting calmly, while a human held her sleeping cub. The cub's purring was the only sound, a gentle rumble that filled the silence. Then Hana started laughing. Not from humor, but from relief and amazement. The sound broke the tension like shattered glass. Professor Velthar collapsed into a chair, all 4 arms hanging limp. The security officers lowered their weapons with shaking hands. From the observation room came the sound of stunned chatter, everyone trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Taeyang was the first to come back into the main lecture hall, moving slowly and carefully. He approached Hyun, keeping a respectful distance from the mother Ripclaw, and just stared at his roommate. You're completely insane, Taeyang said. You know that, right? Hyun smiled tiredly, one hand resting gently on the sleeping cub. Probably. But it worked. Other students began filtering back in, their fear replaced by curiosity. They kept their distance, but they watched with wonder. The Quillen students, who had been the most terrified, huddled together but were no longer crying. They were trying to understand how prey could sit beside a predator without fear. Nixiva approached closer than the others, her reptilian features showing something like reverence. The old speakers, she said again. My ancestors knew. They tried to teach us, but we forgot. We thought predators could only be feared or fought, but there was always a third way. Understanding, Hana added, pulling up more data on her scanner. The mother's stress levels are normal now. Actually below normal. She's relaxed. Both of them are. Professor, are you seeing this? Professor Velthar had recovered enough to check his own instruments. His compound eyes flickered across the readings, and his mandibles clicked in what might have been amazement. The biological data is clear. This is genuine bonding behavior. Not captivity response, not fear paralysis, but actual social bonding across species. I've never seen anything like it. He looked at Hyun, really looked at him with new understanding. You said you grew up on a farm. With animals? Yes, sir. Hyun replied quietly, trying not to disturb the sleeping cub. Dogs, cats, horses, chickens. Even had a bull that everyone said was too aggressive to handle. But he wasn't aggressive. He was scared and trying to protect his space. Once I understood that, we got along fine. And you applied that knowledge here, the professor said slowly, to an alien predator from a completely different evolutionary path. That shouldn't work. The psychology should be different, the signals should be different. But they're not, Hyun interrupted gently. Not completely. Fear is fear. Stress is stress. A mother protecting her child is universal. Some things run deeper than evolution. They're just life. The mother Ripclaw made a low sound, not threatening, almost like she was agreeing. She had been listening to this whole conversation. Even though she couldn't understand the words, she could understand the tones, the body language. She knew these creatures were no longer afraid. That was good. Over the next hour, something remarkable happened. The mother Ripclaw, instead of trying to leave with her cub, simply settled down near Hyun. She laid her massive body on the floor, her head resting on her front legs, and closed her eyes. Not sleeping, but resting, trusting. Word spread through the academy like wildfire. Students and professors from other departments came to see. They pressed against the observation windows, watching in silent awe. The footage was being transmitted across the galactic network, causing debates and discussions on hundreds of worlds. Dean Shalvex arrived in person, a rare occurrence. She was a being of pure energy, held in a containment suit, and her voice had a musical quality. This changes things, she said simply. Everything we thought we knew about predator psychology, about human nature, about the possibilities of interspecies cooperation. All of it changes. A delegation from the Varathian sovereignty arrived within hours, transported by emergency relay. They were officials who had come expecting to retrieve their people and file formal complaints about the treatment of Varathian citizens. What they found instead left them speechless. One of the delegation members, an older Ripclaw with graying scales, approached the barrier cautiously. He looked at the mother and her cub, still near the human, still calm. He made a series of complex vocalizations in his native language. The mother responded, her sounds equally complex. It was a conversation, though nobody but other Ripclaws could understand it. The delegation member's 6 eyes went wide. He turned to face the gathered crowd. "She says the small walker speaks true," the Ripclaw delegate said. His voice translated for all to hear. "She says he spoke with calm voice and showed brave heart. She says he protected her offspring when others showed tooth fear. She says—" He paused, seeming to struggle with the concept. "She says he is pack friend." The room erupted in whispers. Pack friend was a concept from Varathian culture, sacred and rare. It meant someone who could be trusted as family, someone who would protect rather than harm. Ripclaws didn't give that title to other species. They barely gave it to each other. "My people have been alone in the galaxy for eons," the delegate continued. "We are feared. That is good. Fear keeps us safe. But fear also keeps us lonely. We have waited for another species that could speak true, that understood the language of fang and claw, not with fear but with respect." He looked at Hyun directly. "Human, your people come from what you call a death world. We know of this world. It is filled with predators, with danger, with death. Yet your people did not become hard and cold. You became something else. You became speakers of peace who remembered the language of hunt. This is rare. This is valuable." Hyun carefully shifted the cub in his arms, the young Ripclaw still sleeping peacefully. "We learned to live with predators because we were predators," he said simply. "We hunted, yes. We still do. But we also learned that the strongest predators are the ones who know when not to hunt. We made friends with wolves and they became dogs. We made peace with our fear and found trust instead." The delegate made a sound that might have been approval. "The Varathian sovereignty wishes to know humanity better. We wish to understand this balance. We offer alliance." The implications of that statement rippled through the room. The Varathian sovereignty was powerful, respected and feared across the galaxy. An alliance with them would change humanity's position in galactic politics dramatically. Dean Shalvek stepped forward. "This academy would be honored to facilitate such discussions. And perhaps this can be a beginning. Not just for humans and Varathians, but for all species to reconsider their relationships with predators." Over the following days, the story spread across known space. The image of Hyun sitting calmly with a Ripclaw cub sleeping in his arms became famous. It was called the Death World's Gift. The idea that humans coming from a planet filled with danger had learned not to fear predators but to understand them. Other predator species began reaching out to humanity. Some were curious, others skeptical, but all wanted to understand how this small, seemingly fragile species could do what others could not, how they could stand before apex predators without fear, speak without words, and turn enemies into allies. Hyun returned to his normal classes, though nothing was quite normal anymore. The Ripclaw cub, who he had named Suri after his grandmother's favorite bird, visited regularly. The academy had set up proper accommodations for both Suri and her mother, who the Ripclaws called Keeper of Trust. They were there not as specimens but as guests, as friends. Professor Velthar completely restructured his course on predator psychology. Yun became his teaching assistant, helping other students understand that fear and respect were different things. That predators weren't mindless killers but intelligent beings with their own languages and cultures. That understanding was always better than fear. One afternoon, several weeks after the incident, Hyun sat in the academy gardens with Suri. The cub was bigger now, growing fast but still enjoyed napping near him. Hana and Taeyang sat nearby, working on their own studies. "So," Taeyang said, looking up from his datapad, "I've been reading the reports from Earth. They're calling you a hero. The person who changed how the galaxy sees humanity." Hyun scratched behind Suri's ear ridge, making the cub purr. "I just treated her like any other scared animal. That's not heroic. That's just being decent." "But that's the point," Hana said. Most species see predators as things to fear or fight. Humans see them as beings to understand. That perspective, that ability to empathize even with creatures that could kill us, that's uniquely human. Or at least it's rare enough that it might as well be. Nixva approached their group, moving with her usual grace. "I spoke with my people's elders," she said, settling down near them. "The old texts about the speakers? They were talking about people like you, Hyun. Not myths, memories. My ancestors must have encountered another species that understood predators the way humans do. Those speakers taught us to respect rather than fear. Then they disappeared, and we forgot the lessons." "What happened to them?" Hyun asked. Nixva shook her head. "The texts don't say, but they left us with words of wisdom. The fiercest predators can choose gentleness. The softest prey can show courage.